Okay, I think he picked up my notes, but that's okay. Sorry.
This isn't real leather, is it?
Even though this is very thin, this is everything I know. Oh boy. Oh, that was great, great presentation. Next up, we're going to listen to a person who is really very much interested in the proper application of the Indiana Constitution. And I'd like to introduce at this time Andrew Horning.
I'm sorry I don't have a PowerPoint presentation. I had expected to be raptured up by now, and so I guess I'm going to have to do this the old-fashioned way. As opposed to what we've been talking about tonight, which I appreciate. Can you hear me?
No.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right. As opposed to a lot of what we've heard so far, which I appreciate because it's related to what I'm going to talk about, this is not abstract at all. I mean, we're not going to be talking about principles, we're not going to be talking about anything but just like hard nuts and bolts. I'm going to give you about 15 minutes of really basic stuff related to the Constitution. And I really only have a couple of principles I want to cover first. And that is really, first of all, when people talk about the Constitution, there are more than just one Constitution. There are, in fact, one for every state and then a federal Constitution. And the thing that we really miss most often is that the whole concept of rule of law is based on these constitutions, but there isn't anything magic about it. And the basic principle behind all of this is basically that human beings suck. And that, you know, if we were good to any degree whatsoever, we wouldn't have anything called politics. We wouldn't have government. We wouldn't tolerate all the wars and the prisons and the bombs and all that stuff. So first of all, let's get real nuts and bolts here. And that if you've ever, how many of you kind of know the story of 1 Samuel 8? You know, where the Israelites ask for their first king, and then God says, go ahead, give them a king. Tell them what goes along with that. And then there's this long litany of things. He's going to take your daughters and sons and put them before his chariots. He's going to take a tenth of this, he's going to take a tenth of that. You're going to be real sorry. But the reason we have government is because we will not have God as our king, right? So let's just get real clear here. There's nothing magic about constitutions. There's nothing magic about rule of law. All of the stuff we call politics and government is a symptom of the fact that we are sinners who can't get along, and we're basically rotten to each other. And so we have to have some basic rules of some kind. Now, when we've done this before, we've had like Urukagina's Code, we've had Hammurabi's Code, we've had things written down from time to time. Every time that's happened, it's been considered a high point in human history, right? So when, you know, sometimes it has to be signed at the point of the sword, like the Magna Carta had to be signed at the point of the sword. So when these things happen, people are better off. Now, I will tell you plainly that most people are so far off the rails when it comes to the concept of constitutions. Even when people are talking about constitutions that I hear, you know, mostly, you know, well-intended folk, when they're talking about constitutions, they have no idea what they're talking about because they haven't read the one that's most specific to their daily life. Now, if you've read the federal Constitution, you will know that unless you're a pirate, or unless you're doing trade across state lines all the time, unless you're doing, there are really only like 5 federal crimes. And one of them is like, you know, committing, you know, high seas treason. Now, most of us are not capable of doing that kind of stuff. So the rule of law that applies to us every day, the one that we should see properly, is the Indiana Constitution. Now, the last time I was here, I think it took a show of hands. I've done this in several different places. And when I say honestly, how many of you have read the Indiana Constitution? Usually there's just like a little stunned silence, or you have a couple of people who will tepidly raise their hands. But I'm going to tell you, this is the Constitution that you really need to know. If you say you want rule of law, this is what you're supposed to be promoting, because this is where we get public schools. This is where your property tax is. This is where your daily life is supposed to be regulated when it comes to where you go to court. You know, who is really going to be the jurisdiction in this area and that area. Now, where this has made it into the news lately is I hear a lot of people talking about the Fourth Amendment case. You know, the Fourth Amendment case. Well, wait a minute, there was an Indiana court, right? Indiana Supreme Court, It was an Indiana case. This is all really Indiana-based stuff. Is there no Indiana law that prohibits, unreasonable search and seizure? And the fact, of course, is no, not if you haven't read the Indiana Constitution. But if you have, let me just read you just a little bit. Let's see, where did I put it? Article 1, Section 11. And I'm going to just go ahead and read the actual words because it's really important you know this stuff. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable search or seizure shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause supported by oath or affirmation and particularly describing the place to be searched or the person or thing to be seized. That is Indiana law. Now, the fact that a lot of people are thinking that we have to take this to a federal court and that we have to take this to, the Attorney General, we have to take this to the General Assembly. Why? Why are we not thinking straight about this? How many of you know who is supposed to execute the law in Indiana? Show of hands. Well, I know John Hostetler does. You put your hand up. Yes. In a way, you're absolutely right. Absolutely right, with the exception that there's kind of a codified answer here, and that's the governor. The governor is the executive. He is the one who we choose. So I guess he is our proxy in government to do this. But the governor is the one who is supposed to execute the law. Now, nobody ever talks about going to the governor and saying, doggone it, we want you to execute the law of Indiana. And the law of Indiana says, we could just read them. And this is where it comes so important, where we have to know the Indiana law. And to know the Indiana law in its proper order, we have to understand just a couple of key principles. First of all, so I said, we have government because we suck. We have constitutions because we really need rules that are few enough for everyone to know, simple enough for everyone to understand, and important enough that everyone must obey all of them, all the time, without any exception whatsoever. The idea behind constitutions is supposed to be that you can change these laws if you need to, but otherwise, these are to be obeyed as written. Now, when John gets up here and talks about the federal constitution, that's frankly kind of easy, because I bet everybody in this room is okay with the federal constitution. If you were to read it, you'd say it really doesn't apply very much to you. Now, I will tell you honestly, as much as I'm an advocate for rule of law and constitutions, there's a lot of stuff in both of those contracts that I would change if I could. But that's the deal, that's the compromise. People like me have to compromise with the socialists and the authoritarians. We have to say, this is a deal that we have come up with. If we decide we can change it, there's a process for amending it. Now, Indiana Constitution is a little bit different from the federal Constitution in that when we do change it, we make amendments to the Indiana Constitution. They're put into the body of the contract. So it's unfortunate in a way. I'd rather they did it the way they did with the federal Constitution, so you can see the original words, and then you can see what politicians have screwed up in the intervening years. Because that's basically what's happened. Indiana had a better constitution in 1816. They screwed up. They made another one in 1851. And then as they amended, they make it a little bit hard to tell what they got rid of and what they've added and what the original intent was. And as we get into this, if we decide to proceed, well, if we go through the Indiana Constitution bit by bit, you're going to find things that you don't like very much about it. But you're going to have to say, listen, if we want rule of law, we have to take the whole thing. And parts of it, I will tell you that even Christian conservatives will not like all that's in Indiana law. And in fact, in the Indiana Constitution, Article 8, which we're not going to talk about tonight, it's a socialist design. The public school system was come up with by the socialists. And if you don't like it, well, it's still way better than what we're doing right now, because at least it has a funding formula. And if we did Article 8 as it was written, you would have half of your property tax bill gone tomorrow. And this is up to you. You can choose it. So this is getting back to your point. Ultimately speaking, we have what we have chosen. We, the people, have exactly what we have voted for. We have exactly what we have chosen. If we want something different, we're going to have to choose something different. Which means all you people who say you want term limits, but you vote for only incumbents, you're going to have to vote for something different. Now, let me just get on with